welcome back to another Drive Time Chat. As is typical, the late mornings, early afternoons kind of put me on the road to doing some ministry somewhere, and that's where I'm heading right now. Well, it's interesting as we make our journey through life, and we see people around us each and every day. Oftentimes, it's very easy to judge people by what they look like, by their body language, by how they act in a particular circumstance. And sometimes those are accurate appraisals, and other times we're just kind of fishing. And sometimes we can actually evaluate people very incorrectly, and that's when we find it unique in the aspect that we start to judge them as to who they are, what they stand for. And that gets judged up against our preferences more so than it does anything else. And our preferences are personal. Our opinions are personal. Our desires are personal. All of that stuff can really get in the way of talking to people and meeting people and working with people on a way that's going to be productive for God's kingdom. And it's hard not to look at someone or watch someone in a circumstance or hear their language and not put some kind of a label in your mind of what you think they might be or are. I think the real catch here is to not permanently mark them that way. Don't use a permanent marker. Use a pencil that you can erase if you have to, in your mind, of course. And that's where I've found it very interesting. I had a situation a couple weeks back where I was ministering at a funeral where I did not know the family or the deceased. And there was a good number of people in the room. I think the room, for example, sat about 60 people, and there was probably 35, 40 people in the room. But there was a group of people in the back row, 3 or 4 rows behind the rest of the crowd. And they were all sitting together very closely, and to look at them from the outside, you would have probably thought these people are pretty coarse, pretty rough, probably don't live in the mainstream of the population. Not that that's good or bad, it's just you can tell sometimes when you look at people. And that's the impression I got. But, they're here, and I'm up front, and it's my responsibility to share the truth of the gospel in a way that hopefully will connect to them. And that's not to browbeat them, to judge them, or to pin them into a corner where they need to make a decision right now. And so I went about my typical course of ministry in a situation like that, using the variables that I felt necessary as the Holy Spirit spoke to me through the service. And at the end of the service, I closed it in prayer, and I typically just walk back the side aisle in that particular chapel and get out of the room, because the funeral is really not about me. It's about the family and the person who has passed away. And so, that's what I do. So I'm walking towards the back of the room, and these 4 or 5 people were clustered in that last row. And one of the young men, who appeared to be maybe in his early 20s, stood up in the middle of the group and tripped and stumbled his way out to the aisle where I was. And he reached his hand out to me, and I looked at his face, and he obviously had some tears running down his face and was emotionally caught up in the situation. And he reached his hand out to me to shake my hand, and I reached back, and we grasped each other's hands, and he looked at me and said, "Thank you so much." And he didn't say it from a I want to get your approval type of way, or I'm trying to make a good impression on you. He said it from a way that you understood his heart was touched, and something that was said or something in the environment of that particular funeral reached out to him very specially in his heart, in his spirit. And I just told him, God bless you, take care of yourself. And that was the end of it. It reestablished my deepest desire not to put people in a box. not to categorize people by the way they look, because God can work in their hearts regardless of the way they look or the way they seem to be acting, their body language, or their associations that seem to be in a certain category of the culture or subculture. And we really need to be open to the fact that God can use us anywhere, any way, and in any time and in any circumstance that we would happen to be in. And I think we have to be very careful that we don't confine ourselves to what we know in people groups, because the world is very good at dividing people into people groups, and Jesus never did. Jesus recognized some people groups, but he did not put people in them. And that's interesting, because the only people he recognized as a people group were the false religious leaders of his day. I think that's pretty good. I think that would be one we should identify too, but on the other side of the coin, if we don't know their hearts completely, we don't dare do that. Jesus knew their hearts completely, and he understood it because he obviously was God in the flesh, and that's why he was able to do that. But he never put people in people groups, and when I say that, I say, well, he never said, well, oh, you're one of those, he might have recognized how they put themselves in a categorization, but he did not condemn anybody because of that. And I think that's where we have to get an example of how we deal with people who aren't necessarily from our same subculture, our same local sociological circles. And we have a tendency to like what we like and be around what we like. And that's not always really good. Many times that's very difficult for us to grow outside of a pattern where God can use us in many, many different environments and in many, many different ways. So let me encourage you that if you are pretty comfortable with a certain circle of people, that's okay, but don't limit yourself to that. And don't ever outguess God's ability to use you as you live your life each day in some circle groups and subcultures and sociological settings that you wouldn't expect to be used in. And with that, I think we're going to just come to the end of the road here, as I would say. And so take care of yourself and have a good day.